go. All right, I'm with Conner Kees, and he's got a new book out called Trusting Your Foundation, a primer on mystical spirituality and practice. Certainly one of my favorite topics. So
Hmm.
I figured I'd read. Yeah, actually, I like what you wrote here. It's succinct, but but it feels to the point. So I want to read what you wrote off your website about the book,
Hmm.
and we'll talk about it. What is trusting your foundation about? There is something about the world which you know too deeply that is a total mystery. How or why would you ever forget it? To put it plainly, it is
Let's
that you are in no way separate from the fullness of who you really are. Not only that, but you are not separate from anything, nor have you ever been. There is a way of coming into right relation with this so that it emerges into your awareness, both as your lived experience and as the very substance from which you are made. This book is
hmm
about allowing yourself to remember the unspeakable truth, which you've actually known all along, discovering a life which is effortless, fun, and free. All right.
Yeah, so succinct is one way to put that. Let's do that. Let's do that first sentence again. There is something about the world which you know so deeply that it is a mystery how or why you would ever forget it. And
Mm.
so the book is about coming to remember a lot of mystical philosophy. Especially you see this in Islam and Sufism. Uh, you see this in all the way back to Plato's concept of anamnesis. Plato said that all learning is really a remembering, right? So it's actually an unforgetting, an anamnesis. It's an unforgetting. So the question therein lies the question: what is it that we've forgotten, and what is it that we actually came in here knowing? And the book gets at this. The book, by the way, I'm going to say this to your audience because I know you've had people like Paul Selig on, and it's not going to be too wacky for me to say something like this to this audience. And that is that the book, I awoke from a dream on November 27th, uh, from a dream that told me that I would write a book called Trusting Your Foundation.
This is last year.
And, and yes, and 11 days later, the book was written. The book was finished. So there's been some minor edits and things like that, and it does strike this balance between intellect and heart, and of course, that's what we're being invited to do here in this human experience. And I think your listeners who are familiar with this, with, say, like the work of Paul Selig, for instance, might they will grok what's going on there. I had the dream, and then the book was written in 11 days. So one way of saying that could be me saying I didn't write this book, you and at the same time, this book is also I didn't write the book in the same way that Paul Selig doesn't write his books, and yet Paul Selig writes his books. So does Abraham. So does Jane Robertson.
Are
There
you saying this
is
book is channeled?
That's what I'm saying, and
Awesome.
yeah, and that to me is a really surprising thing to know that um, to know that being someone who's I've always been a writer, but to have my first publication land on me like this in a way that I was totally unexpected is a blessing, and is also has revealed to me things about uh, again the nature of the story that's being written, that's kind of unfolding through all of us, that I didn't expect. I didn't expect for it to come this way. So um, I find that delightful, you know, and unexpected and fun. So for those who are interested, yeah, you really could consider this a channeled work. I don't necessarily market it that way. I've put a couple lines in there in the book hinting at the fact that that's kind of what this message is. Uh, I know that this is true for all of us. It speaks again to the nature of what's going on here, that when we are fully ourselves, that there's something else that's allowed to speak through us in those moments. And the book is about remembering our true nature, right? And then again, striking that balance between the paradoxes and contrasts that we see in the world and living a life that is true to the essence of what's possible in this life. And not only what's possible, but also why we're here in the first place. Why we're here in the first place, which to me is, again, all of this is entirely it's a kind of non-rational and intuitive form of knowledge. It's not cognitive, it's felt, it's embodied. It's like you and I were talking about before we hit record. It's about presence. So yeah.
So
I'm
there is
excited.
the question I feel I need to follow up with, that when you say the book is channeled, who or what were you channeling?
That's a great question. I'm going to answer it exactly how I would answer anyone who were to ask me that. And I would say, why does it matter?
I would say it matters because someone might say, well, if you're channeling the devil or you're channeling some dark force, then I don't want to read it. Are you channeling like a light force? I'm just
If
giving you
they
what other
believe it.
people would say.
Yeah. And I would tell them, if you believe if you're afraid that I'm channeling the devil, then don't read it. And if you believe that I'm channeling the devil, then to you, I'm channeling the devil.
Mm-hmm.
Right? To believe that this, first of all, what even is the devil?
Mm-hmm.
For you to be out of right relation with the fullness of your essence, which is
Mm-hmm.
one thing. God is not two things.
That's a great definition.
You
God
know,
is
God
not
is
two
not.
things. I was just telling someone the other day, like they were
Yeah,
asking me, I was going into the
yeah,
Judeo-Christian tradition,
sure.
right? And it seems to me from my reading that historically that was kind of the big breakthrough of like, there's actually only one God, you know? Because before that,
Yes,
you had this idea that there were different gods and they were competing and they were warring and they were fighting with each other. And
right.
it's like the shows you that there's only one God.
Yeah, yeah, do a little history. Yeah, we could do that. You know, I mean, the reason why we have something like Christianity in its present form, excuse me, the reason why we have uh even Islam, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which comes from these
Same branch.
Abrahamic,
Yeah.
yeah, these Abrahamic faiths, was the staunch monotheism of um, the Israelites and the Jews and all this. And the Greeks, the Hellenists, found this fascinating. So this is why you have these Hellenic mystery schools and these, you know, Orpheus and people like Parmenides contemplating and Plotinus and Neoplatonism, basically, and all these people contemplating the nature of the one. And they saw their own, you know, my understanding is, I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is that they saw their kind of polytheism as one way of doing it. There's this kind of magical approach to the world, and then there's the super magical, there's the super conscious, there's the whatever that is, which is the what I my position is that this is actually couldn't be more innate and inherent and intuitive to the human being. And that is where a lot of people, there's a people will have all kinds of objections. They can have all kinds of objections to not just a non-dual message, but a message that has implications that where basically I'm telling you that you already know the truth. I'm telling you that you already have all the answers. I'm telling you that you don't have to go anywhere or do anything or figure any of this out. And people should do what they want. People should follow the invitation of their most authentic desires in the moment in which they find themselves. And of course, now that is going to again, people have all kinds of objections, right? They talk about the nature. They bring their own stories about the nature of humankind and human nature to that conversation, which is not relevant. What I'm out here kind of advocating or preaching on behalf of is a way of being in the world which is easy and which you already know how to live. You already know how to live it. There's, like I said, there's nothing to do in this moment right now, other than be. And we hear things like this. We hear things like this from mystical philosophy and from, you know, whatever. And then we go and we do. We say, ah, yes, being and presence in this moment. And then the next moment we do. But the intuition, the relaxation, the therapeutic effect of feeling into the power of being, the power of presence, the power of, for lack of a better word, sometimes it's a problematic word, surrender to that way, that will, that force, that something which wants to emerge from us, and just allowing and accepting that to flow through us. Like, that's just so damn true.
Okay, so
Nothing could be truer. Yeah. And then the conscious mind projects the structure of its
let me recap
perception on
here.
reality. Yeah, go for it.
So there's only one.
Sure.
You channeled that one for this book to come through, and in the recognition of the one and in the expression of the one, the message is that everyone is that one, since there's only one,
Yes.
and to allow ourselves to be that. And if we can allow ourselves to be that, then we all can become a channel for this one, right?
Not only can we allow ourselves to be that, but we already are that now.
Okay, so this brings up an interesting question for me, which
Mhm.
is that, is there a right or wrong way of living?
There are ways of living there are ways of living which take for granted the perceptions that we are kind of, for some reason, and there is a reason for it, I think. There are ways of living which take for granted the structure of our perception and take that as face value as take that at face value as applying to everything. So in other words, we seem to automatically project the structure of the conscious mind onto the contents of our experience. And what that does often is it it reorients our pain and our suffering is nothing other than, to me, a case of mistaken identity. And
Mhm.
so there are ways of being in the world which see us as separate. There are ways of being in the world which see me as separate from the chair that I'm sitting in, right?
Mhm.
And there are ways of being in the world. There is a single way of being in the world which is naturally emergent from the center of us when it's just, well, that's the thing. It's just naturally emergent from the center of us. To even say it's naturally emergent from the center of us when, or it's naturally emergent from the center of us if, this places a condition upon that emergence, and there are no conditions that can be placed upon that emergence other than the ones that we project with our conscious mind. So was the question about right and wrong ways to live?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. um yes and no. Of course, I would say that there are ways of being in the world that feel good to us and that feel natural and fun and free and expansive and true and real and and open and good, just right, like that, like not right in a moral sense, but just right. Like, this is right, this is true, this is right. And there are ways of being in the world that, again, take for granted the the contents of experience as applying to everything. Because if I were to take for granted the contents of my present perception, I would be telling a story about myself about being on a call with Brian, having earbuds in my ears, and sitting in this, swiveling back and forth in this chair, and it's whatever, May 2nd, 10:30. No, none of that is true. None of that is true, right? There's something else going on here entirely, other than the stories that we have not only become, I mean, goodness sakes, on the one hand, become accustomed to telling ourselves from the social perspective and from a societal perspective. There's stories that we've inherited about the nature of being here. But then there's also, for whatever reason, and again, like I said, I think there's a reason, stories that we seem to fall back on, even if those social and societal stories weren't present. And it has to do with separation. It has to do with there being something here for us in the experience of contrast and in the experience of that separation. I mean, I like to say that all the angels of heaven have their face pressed firmly against the glass of your awareness, right?
There's
And to
something in
whatever,
that you
good.
said that I liked a lot. Suffering is a case of mistaken identity.
Yes.
So what are some of those? What are some examples of mistaken identity that causes suffering?
There's only one. Okay, and these are going to sound like absolutes, and the reason why they're going to sound like absolutes is because they are absolutes. And at the same time that this message can sound really like that, like absolutist, I want the listener to consider the possibility that what's actually being said here has nothing to do with you having a conscious or intellectual grasp of what I'm saying. And that I'm going to say it again. You already have all the answers in this very moment. There is nothing which you need to know. There is nothing which I can possibly teach you, which you don't already fully understand with every cell and every possible, all of your being. So in response to that, I would offer that there is only one true identity. And every identity which is not that identity is not actual, in the sense that it's not reflective of the truth with a this is problematic too, but get over it. The truth with a capital T. It's not reflective of what's actually going on here. I don't think, right? So there's only one identity, and you can't really express it with language. That's the fun part. Right? What we're getting at here is ultimately ineffable, and yet entirely and completely well understood by you, by every listener, by everyone. What is my identity? My identity is I am you, Brian.
Yeah, but I didn't
My
ask you that
identity.
question. I asked you what's the example of mistaken identities. That's
Yeah.
something that can be articulated, right?
What are mistaken identities?
Yeah.
Mistaken identity is when I I was saying earlier, like, here's how I often answer this question. I say that again, you're not, so your one thing is the conscious mind is not going to be satisfied by this conversation. We have to we don't have to do anything, but it will serve the kind of expansion that's possible here for us to relinquish the notion that my conscious mind can even get at the truth, right? We can dance with it, but do you have to know the details of, you can just dance, right? You can just be. So every case of mistaken identity involves the misapprehension of the truth by way of taking the contents of the perception, the perceptions of the conscious mind and the contents of your experience as the fullness of what's going on here. So we're taking what's in front of our faces as kind of like on face value, as like that's what's going on here. In other words, we have kind of downloaded scientific materialism into our ways of being in the world in a way that, um, so long as we fall back on things like atoms or Newtonian mechanics or things like this, even as these actual like abstract explanations for what's going on here. And of course, they're incredibly useful. But the fact that they're useful and the fact that they've allowed the calculus and all this is allowed in physics has allowed the technology and the advancements that we've gotten. That's a part of the story. It doesn't say everything that there is to say about the nature of what's going on here. So it's not a question that I could really answer in the abstract. Like, what did you say? What are some cases of mistaken identity?
Yeah, I think some cases to me would be like if I say like
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm a good person, or I'm a bad person, or I'm an angry person, or I'm a happy person, or I'm any kind of a person.
Yeah.
There's there's
How, yeah,
there's
yeah.
limitations there because I'm
Yeah.
attaching myself to something that's limited as opposed to the unlimited.
Yes. So check this out. Check this out. Good. That was helpful. Thank you.
Mhm.
So, the we might think there's a way to go even deeper than that, Brian. So
Mhm.
there's a way that we might think that, oh, it's the adjective in there. I am a blank person.
Mhm.
So if I remove the adjective in that, and then I have like I am a subject. I am a person. I am I'm a father, I'm a partner, I'm an American, I'm whatever the case may be. The same thing applies. We are still confining our essence and our identity down to this object of consciousness, right? This
Yeah.
thing which I think I have a definition for. So we can in this conversation and always, well, it's always the case whether or not our what we think of as our conscious mind is kind of somehow resonating with or holding this idea, whatever that even means, however that happens mysteriously. We can, like we are we often find ourselves doing, trying find ourselves kind of dancing with in the spiritual or even religious or spiritual but not religious, the kind of new age or new thought also, uh, uh, in this parlance, we return to the notion of Moses in the burning bush, that when Moses went to the burning bush, he said, well, who am I? You're telling me I'm supposed to save the Israelites? Who do I tell them? On what authority? Who do I tell them when I go back down the mountain to my people?
Yeah.
And I say, God told me to, uh, that I've got this mission. Well, who do I tell them that sent me?
Mhm.
And God from the burning bush says, tell them I am sent you. And
Mhm.
before that, he answered the question, well, but who is it? Who are you? He answered the question, I am that I am. Eye asher eye. And the thing about this statement is that it, to me at least, it says enough about the sort of holographic, fractal, recursive kind of implosion nature of consciousness that, you know, I mean, there's a reason why it's been so fascinating to New Thought and to all of us here. Why is it that we think that, for instance, a better way of getting at the nature of what's going on here is to stop qualifying it? So it's not that it's not good or bad. I just, I'm just, I'm just me. I'm just me. And I would offer that you're you are simultaneously more than that, and relative to what the conscious mind is able to cognize into meaning, nothing in particular whatsoever. And so when Moses asked the source of reality its name, God answered, right? When Moses came to God and said, well, but what's your name? God said, the source of reality itself, when questioned by Moses, answered, I am that I am. And so
Yeah.
this usher, this Eye usher Eye, says the usher in there is, I am what I am that I am who I am.
Timelessly.
So, huh?
Timelessly.
Absolutely timelessly. Yeah, it's not 10:40 a.m. here. It's not. Right.
Yeah.
There's something else going, and this is one of the premises from the book. This is what I call premise 2 in Trusting Your Foundation, is that there's something else entirely going on here. This is a really great conversation, Brian, because we've actually gone piece by piece through the premises of the book. Premise 1 is there's a way of being in the world that greases the wheels. And that way of being is naturally emergent from the center of us when it just is, right?
Mhm.
So you see how easy it is for the conscious mind to place conditions on things. There are no conditions that can possibly be placed on anything that could keep anything from being exactly what it is.
I think the really
Yeah.
interesting to me is the bringing together. And again, this is hard to use. This is hard to do in language, but
Yes, it
doing my
is.
best here.
Exactly. Exactly.
We're talking about the non-dual space, right?
Mhm.
And then there is the perception of the dualistic world of time and space. And so the fascinating thing for me is like the kind of the merging of those two,
Yeah.
right? Because what I've
Yeah.
seen on the spiritual path, and I've been there myself, is if you don't merge those two, or at least have the intention to be on the path of merging those two, you're actually in duality. Because if you're like, I don't want to acknowledge the world, I don't want to acknowledge this, and it's
Mm-hmm.
then it's like there's a division because you're keeping something away. So
Mm-hmm.
somehow to like, how do you gracefully be in this consciousness that you're pointing at, and then also how do you
Mm-hmm.
function in the world of like, I live in Hawaii and my name is Conner and I'm this age and I wrote a
Right.
book. And how do you do
Right.
that?
Well, none of those things are true. There's just a story that's being told through the emergence of whatever it is that's looking through my eyes and making my mouth
Mhm,
move,
mhm.
that it thinks that it perceives in
So it
some
kind of
experience.
emerges like naturally and gracefully in the moment.
Yeah, because I mean, there's in the moment in which we find ourselves asking ourselves the question, "Who am I?" There's just the answer.
Mhm.
The answer of who you are and what you're doing here, and all possible existential questions that you ever think could be the most important questions to know about the human experience, are actually already being answered in the moment in which you find yourself. They're being answered by your very existence, because those questions arise from the conscious mind to try and grapple with or assign meaning to the contents of my experience, or the contents of my thoughts and the contents of the stories that I tell myself. And the meaning of life is a given. The meaning of life is baked into this moment. It's not something that need be crafted. This is one of the uh, you know ironically, I take issue with whoever I am. I take issue with the sort of contemporary philosophical approach towards meaning, and we've got people like John Vervaeke out there who's awesome. And there's this assumption about cognitive science, and this assumption about um, meaning, that we call it the meaning crisis, because people don't
Mhm.
have meaning in their life anymore. Why is it that we can't find meaning anymore?
You familiar with
And
Daniel Schmachtenberger?
a little bit, yeah, a little
So
bit.
he works in that realm as well.
That's good. Thank you for reminding me about him.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes, actually, that's been a while. Thank you. Good stuff. Good threads to pull on there. Cool. Look, and that's the story that's being told. Ah, yes. Nothing was lacking from the story that I see in front of me, or the unfolding that's happening, because I didn't need to be reminded of that name. I am reminded of that name in exactly the moment in which I find myself, and who knows? Do you know what I mean? It's like it's it's gotta be that easy. The effortlessness of being here there's some part of us that just knows and feels that this has got to be the way. When you read the Tao Te Ching or you approach whatever it is, you know, it's like you said it perfectly. You said this, whatever it is that you're pointing at, it's exactly what's going on here. Is because we're
Yeah.
just pointing. We're just
Yeah.
pointing. Yeah.
It does feel like there's a through line that I've seen, noticed in
Mhm.
all these diverse mystical traditions,
Yeah.
that they all point to this kind of what you're pointing at, this kind of like effortlessness or this grace, or there's the way of doing that's non-doing,
Yep.
something's happening but not by me. I'm not doing it. Something greater than me is doing it through me. It's
Sure.
because I think people get confused. This is a good question to ask you actually, because people
Cool.
get confused, especially now, because there's so many different spiritual traditions and paths, and it seems like, oh my God, there's so many different things. But actually, they're all pointing at the same universal truth, right? So, what are some of
Right.
those principles that you see that are universal behind all these mystical traditions at different times and places?
That's a fascinating question, and it would be hard for there is this dance like we talked about,
Mm.
like you talked about just a second ago. You talked about somehow striking paradoxically the invitation to strike a balance between the world of perception and this sort of unconscious knowing of the truth, this effortless way of being. And so um, it reminded me of a quote by Liu Yiming, which is that we are invited. I'm sorry. It's actually. I'm sorry. It's. I'm not sorry. It's Zhang Boduan. It's in the Wu Jin Pian. Zhang Boduan says, "You must. You must. You must practice the reversal while you are in the marketplace." Meaning that there's this. He Zhang Boduan also says, "Will you retreat? Will you cast off your wife and wealth and retreat to the mountains just to watch the wind blow the reeds?"
So, what does that
Right.
mean to you?
It's an injunction or an invitation rather, not to absolve ourselves of the world in the process of coming to know and be in right relation with that which it is we actually are, right? So, um, we could quote Christ and say that, man can't serve two masters, and that, if God is one, if God is not two things, then it includes not only the world in which we have been
Hmm.
invited to participate, that it also includes the fullness of it at the same time.
Love that.
There's only one thing happening here. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty good, isn't it, Brian?
Mm.
It's good. You know why it's good?
It's
It's
good
good
and it's
because it
important.
feels good.
Yeah.
It's good because it feels good.
Hmm.
You know, there's a what's funny about this level of mystical discussion, and it's something that I think is not necessary for its acceptance, say, that's a crazy thought even, like necessary for it to be taken seriously, because I don't want necessarily anything to be taken seriously, and there's no shoulds, there's no musts, there's no nothing like that. And yet one of the fascinating things that I see emergent from these ways of being in the world is that they are practical. And
Nice.
people talk about it, like, oh, I get in discussions with people and they want me to get clear on the definitions that I'm using, I would rather talk about the reasons why love, faith, truth, God, identity, authenticity, why all these words that we use that all point to something, if I put a capital letter in front of them, it to make them some kind of neologism, I can feel the way in which the ideal, almost like the Platonic ideal of these words, these virtues, say, or something like that, are all kind of just just orbiting on the like event horizon of this singularity, of this one thing, this one singular emergent core expressiveness of meaning that transcends time and space, and yet I can feel in what I think of as this moment. What the hell is going on here? It's
Beautiful.
it's got it's got to be that easy, man. It's got to be that easy. So sort of like a mystical Occam's razor, like a mystical way of saying not only is this practical, but the simplicity of it, and the invocation of things like paradox, not they baffle the mind,
Hmm.
they confound the mind. And you know
Yeah.
what? For I'll just offer, not that we're doing battle with anything, but I would just offer that confusion, that confounding of the mind is perfectly fine. In fact, it's ideal, because the mind the mind likes to grab control of the steering wheel, but it's grabbing control of the steering wheel from the passenger seat, not from the driver's seat. It's a self-driving car, and the one in the driver's seat is something else entirely. It's God.
Nice. Wow. Okay,
Good stuff, man. Yeah, this is fun.
let's
Yeah.
be sure we cover your path. Is this something that you were born, you knew it as soon as you were born, you knew it from birth, you were aware
All
of
of
it
us
from birth?
know this when we're born. All of us know this when we're
Was
born.
there a journey that you took that this kind of evolved for you? Did you lose yourself along the way at all? Like tell us a bit about your story.
This is great. And this is gonna be, so I could, yeah. So, uh, yes, I've always been a spiritual person. I drew angel after angel after angel growing up, and my mom never took me to church, but she had a deep faith in the goodness of God, and in angels. And in eighth grade, I was recommended a copy of the Tao Te Ching by my father, and then I picked it up, and in eighth grade experienced this enlightenment thing, and then whatever the hell that means. And high school, and then went into graduated high school, and then immediately went into a relationship with nature, and a relationship with the divine and the mystical and the spiritual, in the context of the New Age. So studied the occult and esoterica in the New Age for quite a while, and then I'm less interested in those things now. But that also was, all of those studies and studies in Western philosophy were emerging alongside a an interest and what became a career. I'm an acupuncturist and an herbalist. So I've been an acupuncturist, and I've been an herbalist for over 15 years, and I've been an acupuncturist for a few years now. And yeah, blah 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 blah.
Hmm.
Right. So I hope, like, the listener, and who's like, who the hell is this guy? What? Right. So that's one way of relating. If I were if I answered you the way that I would, the way that feels fun and exciting, and you talked about conversation being alive,
Hmm.
you notice the the tenor of the energy, and coming through as I'm talking about this memory of selfhood that I think that I have as this name, Conner Kees. You could tell the energy, right? How about backstepping again, and reminding ourselves what was said before this, which is that, did I come in with this knowing? Everyone comes in with this knowing. And my story is completely irrelevant. It is completely irrelevant to you and to the listener. And this is one of the things that, when I talk to branding and marketing people, they think I'm ridiculous, because I want to leave my story out of it, and it just be message. Because the conversation that I want to have with people is the conversation that reminds us who we are, why we're here, where we came from, and where we're
Hmm.
going.
One of the things I find,
And yeah,
not to
yeah,
say that it's the way, I don't know, not to say it's not making a judgment about, just an observation, right? So one
yeah,
of the things that I find is that, and I found it with me and my work, expressive studies too, is people
yeah,
have this idea that like they can't relate to you, or like you've had it so easy, you can't imagine how hard their life was, or how difficult their life was, or the problems that they've had. So they can't realize what you realize because they're not like you. This is, I think, one of the challenges that like um happens. with people which I guess you would say that's because they're very attached to the identity of being somebody distinct from the
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that is the exactly. That is a case of mistaken identity. That is operating on the premise that you and I are separate,
Hmm.
right? And my joy is having conversations with people. It could be a person who carries around this kind of notion that's like, what, there's this like separation. There's this chasm between them and like the invitation to connect and to feel and to remember and to recognize that they are already whole in this moment. And my uh it just lights me up more than anything to have the conversations with people where they remember, they know, they come to remember that they've always known, and that there's nothing more to be said. And so when I have conversations like that with people, I call it touching the bottom. It's a point in that we get to in conversations that I have with people,
Hmm.
where there's actually a palpable shift in the energy. Usually, and I send people the recordings of their calls with me, and I say, I want you to watch this again and look at this moment. And I want you to notice that your facial expression changed, not your facial expression, your face changed, your complexion changed, your shoulders dropped, you sighed, and your eyes lit up. And it's because there's a light that's allowed to be, that we have by no longer being in a relationship with what's trying to come through to us that actually feels bad. Instead, we just, in Sufism, it's referred to as like polishing the stained glass window and allowing that light to come through. Well, we remember. And so one of my greatest joys is doing what I call touching the bottom in conversation with people, where when we get to that point, there's actually what I love is the pause that happens. There's a pause because there's a point in conversation when we're both just like knowing, where there's nothing that needs to be said.
Like right now.
Yeah.
Do you want
Yeah.
to,
It's
any
good.
other principles of the book that we haven't shared that?
Premise one is there's a way of being in the world that greases the wheels.
Mhm.
There is a way. Premise two is there is something else entirely going on here,
Okay.
right? And can I cuss on your show?
Yes.
Okay, so premise three is this is not how it is in the book, but I'm going to say it in your show because I want to. And that is there is no possible way that you could fuck this up. You couldn't fuck this up if you tried. Yeah. 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 And rather than, this is a little bit of a extra quasi theological point, and that is to say that rather than taking for granted the sort of subconscious assumption that most of us have about human nature from Heart of Darkness and Lord of Flies and Rousseau, and how that is really just a secular version of original sin. Instead, I would offer original grace. That the tree of knowledge of good and evil is just taking for granted the perception of of duality in consciousness, taking for granted the contents of my conscious mind as the fullness of what's going on here, as if there are two things happening. There's only one thing happening.
So recognizing our true identity that transcends time and space is the foundation. Is that accurate?
Something like that. Yeah, like
Mhm.
like, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Who are you really?
Ramana Maharshi's great question. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What an interesting character. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
With a story that was lived through him that a lot of people then take the emulation of as their journey, which is not true to them. If it
Yeah.
was their journey, they would be living it. But their journey is to think that his journey is something to emulate, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, Brian, this was high and deep and big and small and all those things. And it was awesome, dude. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else you want to share that we haven't shared yet? Any like important principles or points or anything come channeled once they come through by the one? Anything that you feel like, oh, I wish I would have shared that.
No, I don't. Yeah, well, I'm not. I don't exist in time, and regret is certainly an energy that does not serve. So, regret is certainly stems from a case of mistaken identity. So you will not. Personally, you will not see me going and thinking, "Oh, wish there was something that I would have shared." But it's all good, man. It's all good. It's all good. And I think this was a fantastic discussion. This was what's really interesting is it was highly intellectual in a way, and this is the paradox that we see spoken of, like in the first chapter of the Kabbalion, for instance, or in certain Taoist texts, where it's like, if the Tao is not, if the name, if the eternal name is, cannot be named, and the essentially nameless is the eternally real, then why the hell are we talking so much about it?
Mm-hmm.
Talking so much about it is just what we find ourselves doing in this moment, and in talking about it, we circle around that thing. We get into orbit of this thing, and it feels good.
I think too that the more that we go into the complexity of, like, you're obviously extremely well read, right? You've delved into a lot of knowledge from a lot of different realms of history and different backgrounds. So I think the more people bring the mind into the complexity of duality, of the differentiation of, as in Taoism, they say the 10,000 things, right?
Yes.
The more you get into the 10,000 things, it's almost like it doesn't have to happen, but it seems that it does happen, that people lose the one, right? They lose awareness of the one, they forget about it. And so these conversations, the books, teachings come through just to point people to that truth, and like, hey, remember who you really are, don't get caught up in all this complexity.
Sure. The weird paradoxical thing, of course, is that they think that they've lost the one.
Yes, they think they actually haven't.
In coming to remember the one comes with the remembrance and the knowing that the one cannot be lost. Right?
Yes.
There's nothing which we haven't really forgotten anything. This is just some weird story.
Yeah.
It's Bill Hicks telling us it's just a ride. There's your mystic. There's your modern mystic. Yeah.
Bill Hicks. Yeah. The comedians, I think they're more tapped in than the pastors and preachers sometimes.
Oh, I think that's wise. I think that's really true. Yeah. That's a fascinating observation. And why? Because they remind us that our boundaries and the assumptions that we hold about the world, like when you're offended by a comic, what could be more? That's a rapturous experience. to be offended, because to be offended means that there are assumptions about the world that you're holding on so deeply that your very safety is threatened by someone else having an idea of something that's somehow contrary or antithetical.
It's like poking at the edge of your false identity.
Something like that. Exactly.
Yeah, and you're like, I want to hold on to this separate identity. And humor will poke at the edges of that identity. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So the book is Trusting Your Foundation. primer on mystical spiritual practice, Conner Kees. Thanks for
Yeah,
being
man.
with us.
Yeah, thank you, brother. I appreciate it. I appreciate